What's going on, everybody? It is Tuesday. That means it's time for that EFIN Fantasy Sports Show. We got NFL writer Adam Holz here. As always, you see him there on my right, your left. I don't know. What's this over here? I don't know. On my left. We're going to get you guys all caught up on last week. We can call it last week because it ended yesterday. Last week's action, week 13. We're going to get you moving in the direction of week 14 playoffs. Hopefully you guys made them. We're going to talk all about it. It's coming up next. Stats. Here we go. All right, welcome to the show, everyone. We're going to switch things up a little bit in format. We're going to try not to keep you guys here so long. We know you guys want to be here as long as we do talking about this stuff, but gosh darn it, everybody's got things to do today. Adam, welcome to the end of week 13. Football, it was fantastic. Our NFL predictions, we will get into in a minute, not so great. Obviously, some big injury stories. We're trying to cut this one shorter. It's going to be real rough on us this week. There's a lot to talk about, my friend.
There's always a lot to talk about. Look, it was a great week for my Cowboys. It was a great week for my fantasy teams. Went 5-1, but unfortunately, you know how big of a fan I am of Trevor Lawrence. So to cap off the weekend with a Trevor Lawrence injury was not the way I wanted it to end.
I've got a ton of stock in Trevor Lawrence, and yeah, that's not going to be helpful to me at all, having him go down, to say the least. It's also not going to be helpful to the Jaguars, but we will get into that as the show progresses for sure. Let's get into how well we did, or in this case, did not do for the first weekend. All right, before the season started on that EFIN Sports Show, you can go over to that EFIN Sports Show channel, but just look up the podcast. The channel is a lot of us just sitting there talking. It's really podcast material. But what we did is we went through the entire NFL. We went through every team. We went through every game, and we predicted exactly how these teams were going to finish. I, of course, was spot on, especially with Carolina. Adam is going to come out as spot on as me. But to be perfectly fair, we are killing it. We have been killing it. We are above 60% this season, and that's predicting everything beforehand. That said, this week was not so great. I go 4-9. You go 6-7. Your second losing week in a row by one game, both times. And my second overall, I'm at 118-75. You're at 122-71. Like I said, both above 60% and how we predicted them. Honestly, it was visiting team week, 8-5 for visiting teams over the home teams. But don't put too much, tilt in that, as 9 of the 13 games were one-score games. 9 of the 13 games were one-score games. 2 went into overtime. 57 total touchdowns this week. Let's see what we have. 28 through the air, 29 through the ground. Rushing touchdowns actually beats passing touchdowns this week by 1. You can thank last night for that, as we had some rushing touchdowns from quarterbacks. 7 quarterbacks accounted for those 29 rushing touchdowns, 22 running backs, and of the 28 passing touchdowns, 27 were wide receivers. Jerome Ford, the only running back to pull one in a reception touchdown for his team this week. Record watch, Adam, it was brutal. We both come out losing records. Again, visiting teams, 8-5. I don't know. What do you get out of this weekend's scores?
Look, I mean, we talk a lot about all the unknown variables that we had to factor in before the season, and we kind of did this blindly without knowing a lot of things. So if I have 11 winning weeks in 13 tries and we're both still over 60% correct on our picks, one losing week isn't going to shake me. I think we're doing awesome this year.
I'm not a professional gambler, but I have to imagine, like, if we were, to put $10 down on every game with a over 60% win rate, we'd be fairly happy with that, I would think, right? Like at 60%, that's winning.
Well, right. I mean, that's winning when you're playing the point spreads, right? We're picking these games straight up. So the money lines is a much different story because of all the juice that you have to lay on favorites.
I guess it's the
that
same.
winning 60%, I'm not so sure that would be profitable. But if you're hitting 60% of your point spread bets, you're doing okay.
I mean, if you can say that on your betting side, I'm hitting 60%, that's probably something you're going to say, I would think.
Sure,
Like, that's not a bad thing. I don't know. I'm
sure.
proud of it. I'm proud of what we've done, my friend. Let's get into this week's rewind and talk about the fantasy week that we all just went through. All right, fantasy rewind. We're going to switch it up a little bit. As in, we are not going to take a half hour to go through the fantasy week that you already know about. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to change up this format. We're going to do the fantasy rewind in under 10 minutes, which means 15. But we're calling it the 10-minute rewind. And it's kind of a challenge to ourselves to see if we can actually get through all the amazing stories of this week in under 10 minutes. Like I said, I'm giving us a 5-minute bumper. And that's because we are going to do, we're going to get you guys all the stats that came out of this week because we love doing that for you guys. So we are going to get you guys on the Stat Line Express. We'll hit every room. But as far as the scores, 10 minutes on the clock. Here we go. It's Thursday, Seattle at Dallas. Dallas comes out ahead. We talked about 9 games within one score. This was one of them. Geno Smith bounces back, looks spectacular with 334 yards as the leading rusher. But Dak Prescott, I hear a lot more MVP coming after his name after this game. It was a great game. It was awesome to see on Thursday night. Your top QB and your top receiver for the week come out of this game, and top 10 guys all over the board. It was a great game. It was a great game.
I mean, I would just like to say that for the past probably 3 or 4 weeks, I've been talking about Dak Prescott quickly climbing up those MVP rankings. He wasn't necessarily getting the national recognition for it, but he's becoming undeniable at this point to at least have his name in the mix. Now, next week, Dak Prescott versus Jalen Hurts on Sunday Night Football. That game is going to tell a big story about not only the NFC playoff picture, but the MVP race as well. That's a big deal. That's a statement game for one of them. We always talk about with these MVPs, you need that signature performance along the way. That could be the one.
That's going to mean just so much for the entire NFL in general. The NFC East, the playoff picture, like you said, the MVP race, the playoff race. I mean, just there's so many implications of this game. Let's go. I am here for it. Sunday morning, we open with, again, great games. We got 4 games within one score in this one. In the morning slate, Indianapolis at Tennessee. I mean, it's probably not a game unless you're a fan that you were like super excited about, but fantasy-wise, Gardner Minshew gets 312. Derrick Henry goes over 100, 102. Michael Pittman Jr. goes over 100, 105. All those guys land themselves in the top 10 list. I mean, it goes to overtime. The bad news, of course, is that we see Henry exit with the injury in that one. But again, another good game.
Look, I mean, Michael Pittman Jr. is having an unbelievable fantasy football season that like nobody's talking about. He's going over 10 receptions. I mean, over 10 targets every week. He's putting up 100-yard games. He's scoring touchdowns. Like, not enough people are talking about how good Michael Pittman Jr. has been this year. And that's just the story of the Colts in general, right? The Colts have a playoff spot right now. They've been so good all year, doing it with my other guy, Gardner Minshew, who I always say is the best backup quarterback in the NFL. He gets into games. He knows how to manage them. He knows how to win them. He has the Colts in great shape right now.
We're going to talk about backup quarterbacks during the Pulse, getting the Pulse with Hulse this week. He didn't know that until just now, but now he's got a little bit in his head. Michael Pittman, wide receiver 11, one of only 11 wide receivers over 200 fantasy points this season. Killing it, especially with a backup quarterback, right? I mean, he was already doing well with Richardson. Los Angeles at New England. You didn't expect much out of New England. You didn't get much out of New England, although you saw some Ezekiel Elliott, so you might expect him to be looked at in the waiver wire this week. What happened with the Chargers, though? Justin Herbert only with 212. Allen does not make the top 10 this week. I don't know. It's just a game that no one – like, honestly, I'm watching Red Zone, and it's like, oh, yeah, that game's on every time they do a little update. But there wasn't a lot of it.
Look, I mean, the Patriots are so bad this year that, like there's no reason to talk about them much in a good light, but their defense has been unbelievable lately. Again, they're not getting the credit because they're not winning games. I saw a stat recently that over the last month, they're averaging the fewest points per game allowed, but they lost all of those games. So
That's
it's obviously the offense, but that's not breaking news.
I like it. That's good stats right there. I love the stats. Detroit at New Orleans, another one of those 9 one-score games. This one kind of went back and forth for a bit. Nobody looking fantastic on the quarterback side. I mean, they get it done, but not bad, not great. You wanted more out of Jared Goff. That's Jameis Winston ends up having to come in with a car injury. That could have big implications, especially when we talk about the other injuries this week. Taysom Hill is your leading rusher, although Kamara has 2 touchdowns, so he ends up in the top 10 this week. Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, both pay off for you in the fantasy market. A lot in due Gibbs, of course, because of his receptions. Sam Laporta shows up again. This guy, man, I don't know if anybody predicted him to have this kind of season. Top 10, okay, because it's tight ends. You can make that. 140 yards, 1 touchdown, 15.6 average. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous at tight end. St. Brown quietly, not in the top 10, but quietly goes 249. 2 for 49 with 1 touchdown, and Alvin Kamara adds another 6 for 58. Again, it was actually a good game. 2 teams that at the beginning of the season, everybody's kind of wishy-washy on. Saints expected to win this thing. Saints are kind of tapering out a little bit because of injuries. Detroit still doing what Detroit's been doing all year.
Well, Detroit's kind of barely hanging on recently, too, right? Their defense is going back to what they were doing last year, which is giving up 1,000,000 points a game. And Jared Goff, over the last few games, has not looked as crisp and clean as he did in the beginning of the season. He's making some shakier decisions. He's throwing some interceptions. And let's remember, in this game, too, the Lions jumped out to a huge, I think it was a 21-point lead in the first quarter. And they let the Saints get right back in this one and almost gave it away to them.
They used to be one of the better defenses, sliding out now, but they still got a 3-game lead on the division with Minnesota on the bye. So nothing hurt. And of course, they walk away with the win. So, they've got some room to figure some things out. Maybe they're trying some things for the playoffs. Atlanta and New York, the game no one really cared about. Tim Boyle comes out as your leading passer. I don't know, 148 through the air. Nobody gets over 100. Xavier Gibson is your number 1 wide receiver. I mean, that tells you. Tim Boyle is your number 1 passer. Bijan ends up with 53 yards. Xavier Gibson is your number 1 wide receiver. That's about all you really need to know about this game.
Yeah, I mean, this Jets offense is not just bad, it's becoming like historically bad. Like when you look at some of their numbers, like their red zone efficiency, their 3rd down conversions, they're not just in last place in the NFL, they're in last place by a mile. Like their 3rd down conversion percentage, I think is like 8% lower than any other team. It's like absolutely insane how bad this offense is.
If it wasn't for the millions of dollars, I'd say these guys are last place in life right now. But at least they can go home to their big paychecks. And what's crazy is this was supposed to be one of the premier teams. Of course, Rodgers goes down, but you got both sides of the ball, rookie of the year on this team, and they're horrible. They're horrible. Last year's rookie of the year on both sides of the ball on one team, and they suck. Arizona at Pittsburgh. Arizona steals one. That's what I'm calling it. Kyler Murray only passes for 145, but it's enough. It's enough to pop 24 on Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh just, they got a new offense. They got a new offensive coordinator. They really are just trying to maintain a winning season, maintain that absolutely ridiculous 17-year run as non-losing seasons. James Conner got you 105, but again, stat-wise, not a great fantasy game here with Arizona and Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I mean, Pittsburgh, your Pittsburgh, they're hanging on by a thread right now, man. They are still obviously right in that mix for a wild card spot. But let me just say this about Pittsburgh. They better beat New England on Thursday. They better beat the Patriots on Thursday, because if they don't, Pittsburgh's in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, we got to get the winning season. We can still steal that wild card spot. So I'm not panicking yet. But you're right. We got to win the games that we frankly are supposed to win. Let's see, what do we get to next? Oh, Miami and Washington. Everything we expected. You got big stats out of Sam Howell, who ends up in the top 10 list. Tua ends up in the top 10 list. Howell actually ahead of him. This is what Howell does now. He's just consistent. We'll get into that in the stats of the week. Miami, of course, is putting up big points across the board. Tyreek Hill, 157 yards for Tyreek Hill. Actually finishes wide receiver 5. So that tells you about the wide receiver week that we're going to talk about later on in the show. Miami all over this one. Washington, tried to play catch up. It was, it got out of hand pretty quick. Tyreek Hill just could not be stopped.
Like we were expecting this to be a big type of fantasy game. We both talked about Howell last week, and with his consistency and in this kind of matchup, he was definitely a good guy to target in fantasy this week. So this one, I think, kind of went the way we thought it would.
I think it went exactly. Other than you can't stop Tyreek Hill, but 5 for 7, 157, 31.4 average, 31.4. The only person that had more was Alec Pierce, who I sat moments before the game started. Thanks. Like we talk about it all the time. Don't make game day changes. Don't ever do it. I did it. That's bad.
Those last minute tweets, they'll get you every time.
Every single time. Gosh. But Tyreek Hill, 31.4 average. Absolutely ridiculous. I wonder who wide receiver 1 is on the season. Can't figure it out. And like you said, we got what we got here. Houston at Denver, a fantastic game. Back and forth. CJ Stroud, 274 points, ends up in your top 10. Nico Collins, he's your wide receiver 1 on the week, 191 yards. Absolutely ridiculous, 191. You figure CJ Stroud had 274. Nico Collins had 191 of that. So there was only, 93 other yards that went other places. 191 yards for Nico Collins. Hope you played him. I did. Russell Wilson, kind of back to earlier season Russell Wilson. He showed some flashes. He definitely hit some windows. Houston just too much.
Houston just keeps rolling. CJ Stroud just keeps rolling. Obviously, the unfortunate news is Tank Dell suffering the season-ending injury. He's been a superstar this year, super explosive. What that does for fantasy-wise, Nico Collins, rest of the year, becomes probably a top 10 wide receiver to own right now for the rest of the year without Dell in that lineup, with the way that CJ Stroud is slinging it around. And for you waiver wire people, go get Noah Brown. If he's still on your waiver wire, go get Noah Brown right now.
Which luckily is who I switched out Alec Pierce for. I dropped Pierce for Noah Brown. So, I don't know. I still would have rather had the win. That's the morning slate. We'll get to the afternoon slate in just a second, but we got to get you some stats. We got to get you some numbers. This is what I live for. I live for the numbers. Adam, pay attention because I'm coming to you afterwards. Here we go. Choo-choo! We're changing it up a little bit. We're getting on the Stat Line Express. All aboard. We're going to the QBs. Here we go. Geno Smith finishes as your QB1. There he is, kids. After a horrible last week, he gets your QB1 this week. Hope you played him. Hope you didn't give up on him. It was a great game. We said play him because it was going to be a good game. We just didn't think he was going to win your fantasy week like this. There you go. Brock Purdy sitting up there at number 2, and your boy Dak Prescott at number 3 again. I think it was 3 consecutive weeks at number 3. I mean, like I said, definitely 100% in the MVP conversation. Can't wait for Sunday. Jake Browning not only debuts on the list, he debuts at the list at number 4. And this is against a good Jacksonville defense. We'll talk more about that when we hit the running back room. Jake Browning, there he is. Trevor Lawrence exits the game and still ends up as QB5. Jalen Hurts there at 6. J Love at 7. Stafford at 8. Look at Stafford. Stafford just debuted on this list week before last. All right, week 12. Stafford finally makes the top 10. Does it for 2 consecutive weeks. Sam Howell, yet again, 8 times on the list. It's ridiculous. What is he, 6 weeks in a row now? 6 weeks in the top 10 for Sam Howell in losing efforts, but stat-wise, There you go. And Tua finishes out with number 10 when you got Tyreek Hill finishing as wide receiver 5. Good chance that the quarterback's going to be there. Let's talk about some of these facts. Geno is the only quarterback over 30 this week. Browning is the 36th quarterback to make that top 10 list. QB1 on the losing team for the second week in a row. 5 top 10 quarterbacks had rushing TDs. You got to get your quarterbacks got to be mobile. We talked about this last week. 7 of the top 10 QBs had 0 interceptions, and I can't read that last one, but it's there. If you guys go check out the Instagram, we had all the quarterbacks, all top 10s were in 6 games again. That's what it was. Same thing last week. It only took 6 games to get all top 10 quarterbacks, including your top ones. Again, 4 over 300, 5 quarterbacks with 3 or more passing touchdowns. Of course, Brock had 4 total. 6 had rushing touchdowns. Howell had 2 rushing touchdowns, actually, which is a big reason he's on this list. Geno Smith, of course, had 4, 3 passing and 1 rushing. T-Law with 2 passing, 1 rushing. 9 interceptions, 9 quarterbacks with interceptions. 3 of them are in your top 10. Wilson with 3 all by himself. 12 got sacked 3 or more times. Levis leads it with 6. Stroud and Zappi both got hit with 5. Of course, we know Stroud, the only one to walk out with a win in that one. For that stat, 4 top 10 quarterbacks lost, which is interesting. I think it was a little higher last week, including number 1. We talked about that. Number 1 quarterback second week in a row. 6 top 10s had rushing touchdowns. 6 top 10 quarterbacks had rushing touchdowns. And that is your first stop on the Stat Line Express. Adam, what do we think about these numbers?
Well, I think for the second week in a row, it's highlighting some of the important things to look for when you're looking for quarterbacks in fantasy football. When you look at this top 10, rushing upside, obviously all the rushing touchdowns in the top 10. You mentioned how few games it took that included the top 10 players.
That's just
highlighting
crazy.
game scripts, right? And losing quarterbacks that can be in the top 10, like your Sam Howells, who does it every single week. So rushing upside and game scripts, extremely important when you're targeting quarterbacks, especially when you're looking at DFS and stuff like that, when you can find those low-priced value type of quarterbacks with a lot of upside that people may be overlooking, but in the right matchup, they can score a lot of points. And hey, look, just from a personal note, I would like to shout out Jake Browning giving me my Monday Night Miracle last night. I only needed 10 points from him. And to be honest, I was nervous going into that game needing 10 points from Jake Browning, and he exploded. So he gave me a stress-free Monday Night Miracle.
Wow, that's awesome. There you go. Monday Night Miracles. I'm just looking at something here. 5, 6, 7. 7 of your top 11 quarterbacks are leaders in rushing. So you take the top rushing quarterbacks, 7 of them are in your top 10. And as far as touchdowns go, 4 are in your top 5. 4 are in your top 5 rushing touchdowns. There you go. Those are things that you need to know from your quarterback room. Let's keep it rolling as we attempt to finish up this week. This week's games. Tampa Bay, Carolina, kind of a snooze fest to watch. Tampa puts up 21. Baker goes over 200. Chuba helps some people out. He makes the top 10 this week at 104. And, of course, Mike Evans just goes ridiculous at 162. He obviously is in your top 10 again this week. And Carolina is officially eliminated from the playoffs with their 1 win so far. It won't look like Carolina might pull this one off, but alas, they did not.
Yeah, I mean, Chuba was a guy I was definitely fading this week. He's kind of slipped a little bit lately, and Tampa Bay traditionally has a very good defense against running backs. So, yeah, the Chuba big game was definitely not something I expected. No. A close game with the Bucs coming out in the end is what I expected.
Yeah, there you go. Cleveland at Los Angeles, the Rams. Matt Stafford for 279. Kyron Williams, he makes the top 10 this week with his 88 yards because he caught a few balls. Puka Nacua ends up at wide receiver 11 this week with 105. Rams come out with the win. That Cleveland defense just kind of seems to be slipping and slipping. Honestly, I think they're getting tired. That's really what I think it is. They're getting wore out, but that's just my take on it.
I'm with you on that. Their offense hasn't given them a whole lot of help. They've been on the field a whole lot. They have been shutting people down. But let's also credit the Rams offense. The Rams offense has looked very good, especially in recent weeks and especially since Kyren Williams has returned. Look, Kyren Williams has been a fantasy football superstar this year,
Absolutely.
too. He missed a lot of time with the injury. He obviously didn't start the season as a starter, so he only has a handful of starts this year. But in those starts, I believe he's in the top 5 in fantasy points per game.
He has 6 visits to the top 10 this year. That's in 12 games. And you talked about the injuries. Kyren Williams.
Well, I mean, there was injuries, and he began the year as not even playing. He was behind Cam Akers to start the year. So, I mean, he has 6 top 10s, and he only has what, like 6 or 8 starts?
That's right. He's number 12 in fantasy points, and for a rookie out of nowhere, missing however many games he's done that in 8 games. So he missed 4 games, and he's still at running back number 12. He's definitely sitting probably in the top 5 if he doesn't miss those 4 games. Kyren Williams, just a nice surprise for those of us who just happen to snag him or acquire him or get him when they said sell him high. Kyren Williams, big surprise. We get to the game of the week. It was supposed to be the game of the week. I think meaning-wise, it's still the game of the week. But watching it, it was a freaking clinic. San Francisco at Philly. Brock Purdy with 314. Christian McCaffrey. Brock Purdy, number 3 in the top 10. Again, Christian McCaffrey in the top 10. Again, Deebo Samuel in your top 10. Hurts was there also, but that was really, Hurts thankfully didn't get hurt. We're going to get into that later as well. But San Francisco dominated this game. Playoffs. I can't wait.
Yeah, I mean, this potentially was an NFC Championship preview type of game. It was obviously the NFC Championship last year.
Yep.
Look, good for Brock Purdy. He came into this game feeling like he had something to prove after he got hurt in the NFC Championship game last year. He probably couldn't wait to get another opportunity to, prove himself against the Eagles, and he did it in a huge way, throwing 4 touchdowns, and the Niners just absolutely carved up the Eagles all game. Well, I guess for 3 quarters, because I believe it was 6-0 Eagles after the first quarter, and then the Niners just caught fire after that. But yeah, just to backtrack for 1 second, I looked it up really quick. The stat I was looking for, Kyren Williams, RB3 in fantasy points per game when he's the starter. RB3 this year.
There you go. So if he's starting, which he is, play him. Play Williams. And play all your San Francisco guys. Play your Philly guys too. They got some, stats coming out, in a catch-up. But at least Hurts did. But man, San Francisco, whew, they definitely.
Yeah, they look scary good right now, San Fran, both from fantasy perspective and NFL perspective. Everything clicking for that offense right now. And when that offense is clicking to pair with a defense that we all already know is elite, and a defense that added Chase Young at the trade deadline, which I still think is a storyline that's not getting enough credit that it should, to pair Chase Young with Nick Bosa on a defense that was already arguably the best in the NFL. Man, watch out for the 49ers.
Don't get those Buckeyes together. They're crazy. Super Bowl contender, now a phrase that fits very well with San Francisco at this point. Kansas City, Green Bay. Green Bay comes out on top. That's what I said. I said Green Bay came out on top. If you watch this one, honestly, Kansas City didn't look great. You were waiting for the comeback, but Kelsey was not involved. Kelsey's still the number 1 receiver with his 81 yards, but he only had 4 receptions. Rashee Rice looked fantastic with his 8 receptions. And then you had a couple spread around like everything else. But Kelsey they could not or would not get him the ball when they needed to get him the ball. In my opinion, this deviation or Green Bay's ability to cover Kelsey, however that worked, a combination of, is why Kansas City loses this game. Jordan Love shows up and shows out. 267, 3 touchdowns. That's what you need to know. Nobody else really had to do too much. Romeo Doubs with 4. Christian Watson, though. Christian Watson, 7 for 71, 2 touchdowns. One of my do not plays this week. He balled out with Jordan Love against this defense that has absolutely shut down wide receiver ones over the past 5-6 weeks. I mean, we're talking Tyreek Hill at 12 points, Devontae Adams at 12 points, A.J. Brown at 1.8 points. I mean, they have decimated wide receiver ones. Christian Watson, just let them have it. Just let them have it. Congratulations to Green Bay, a team that should not have won this game, but they did, and they did it handily, honestly.
Look, I mean, you called it before the year that you thought that this awful wide receiving core for the Chiefs was going to catch up to them at some point, and that they may not be able to overcome it this year like they were able to last year when obviously they won the Super Bowl. You know, your prediction is kind of starting to look more right in these last couple of weeks. They've ultimately kind of lost these games because of their wide receivers. Now, I don't want to take anything away from the Packers and Jordan Love. He played a fantastic game. The Chiefs defense, who's been great all year, this was probably their worst game of the season. They did not play well in this game against the Packers. They've been shutting teams down for weeks and weeks in a row now. So, you can kind of give them a break that they just didn't have it in this one. But the scary part for the Chiefs' overall season outlook is that when the defense didn't show up, the offense couldn't overcome it. And that's not something we're used to seeing with Mahomes and the Chiefs. We're also not used to seeing Mahomes and the Chiefs. We're now entering week 14, and the Chiefs are the 4 seed in the AFC. 4 seed.
Yeah. I mean, they're still in, and that's really what you have to worry about. If they're in, it's a whole new season. But, that's not what we saw. They're handily in first place, but 4th position, still a lot of season to go. Let's be honest. There is. But you brought it up. Green Bay does not have this fantastic defense, and Kansas City couldn't overcome it. Interesting. Very interesting. And, of course, last night's Monday's Barn Burner, it was everything that no one expected. Jake Browning comes out and finishes at QB4. Lawrence at QB5, but gets injured. We're going to talk about that injury. Devastating, potentially devastating for Jacksonville. Because Jacksonville does not have a Browning waiting in the wings by any stretch of the imagination. So they take it to overtime. Jake Browning, if you watched any part of SportsCenter last night to this morning, he went 354 yards in the air. Absolutely ridiculous. Jamar Chase with 149 of those. Joe Mixon only 68 on the ground, but finishes at RB1. Joe Mixon, another one of my absolutely do not plays this week because Jacksonville is supposed to have one of the best rushing defenses in the NFL. They had only allowed 2 rushing touchdowns. They were number 1 against fantasy running backs on the season. And Joe Mixon, again, not a lot on the ground, 68 on the ground, but he gets the 2 touchdowns and he had some receiving. And he ends up as your RB1 this week, which we will talk about in a second. But man, what a great game last night. What a great game.
Yeah, that was not the game I was expecting to see. I was expecting to see kind of an uglier game, a slower pace game. It ended up being super excited. I already, made my statement on Jake Browning, and, he far exceeded what I needed him to do in the league that I had him in. I'm right there with you with Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon was one of my fade picks this week as well. He was a guy I was staying far away from, and the guy that I told people that leave on your bench this week. This is an awful matchup for him. So, I had to eat crow on that one as well.
Yeah. But Joe Mixon quietly RB6, fantasy RB6 on the season. There, he's just getting it done little by little, chipping away. Doesn't have a lot of 100-yard games, but he has a lot of, close to or just above 100 yards combined with those receiving yards. Speaking of running backs, let's get back on the train. Next stop, RBs. All right, the switch up gets you guys up front on the screen. Joe Mixon, as I said, finishes as RB1. There you go. Alvin Kamara, his 7th time on the list. Alvin Kamara quietly having a fantastic season. He hasn't even, been in the whole season. And there he is, 7 times on the list. A-Chain, I know he doesn't want to be called that, but I'm sorry. It's like Your name's a Chain. You got to be a Chain. Sorry, that's what you got to be. Finishes at RB3. Mozart owners, how you feeling? Travis Henry, King Henry ended up at number 4, but we saw the injury, something to think about there. Connor quietly against the Pittsburgh defense, which is, back and forth against runners. Connor ends up at number 5. Chuba Hubbard, we talked about. Not a lot of excitement behind him. I had to play him. He finishes at 6. McCaffrey, 10 times. There's a double-digit guy for you. First running back to hit 10 times. Look, we're only in week 13. 10 times on this list, you've seen his name. Ridiculous. Pacheco, in and out of little injuries, but Pacheco getting it done. We talked about the lack of production at the wide receiver room. Pacheco is getting it done and doing what he has to do in the running back room. Finishes at 8. Robinson at number 9. And Rashid White, 4 times on the list, really turning it on at the end of the season. And he ends up at number 10. We got some facts to throw your way. I'm going to have to start thinking about where I set these things up in relation to how this is going to play out. But only 4 running backs went over 100 yards in week 13. That was the same as last week. So, surprise. 6 running backs had multiple TDs. None had more than 2, though. None had more than 2. I think we had 4 running backs have 2. That's interesting to me. Anyway, 5 running backs had 20-plus attempts. 4 of those that had 20-plus landed in the top 10. You talk about volume, there's your evidence right there. 16 running backs had a rushing touchdown. Ford, the only guy with a receiving touchdown, though. That is interesting. We usually have more receiving touchdowns. Ford, the only one with a receiving touchdown. 13 running backs over 15, 9 over 20 fantasy points. That actually is right in the average. That's where it's supposed to be. And your top 10, CMC is in the top 10 out of 12 games. That's why I left him up there. I know he didn't finish number 1, but to be there 10 out of 12 weeks is absolutely ridiculous. CMC having a friggin' year. As we wrap up the RB stats, Mixon is the number 1 this week, despite only 68 yards on the ground. He went 8 of 16 last week, which is why he was such a fade this week. Okay, he had a 2-yard average last week. This week, only 68 yards on the ground, but his 2 tutties make him wide receiver 1. Again, Jacksonville was number 1 against running backs and only allowed 2 rushing touchdowns. They just got doubled up in one game. Those are your RB stats. Adam, what do you think?
Well, I mean, the Ford having the only receiving touchdown is kind of mind-blowing to me. Like, that's not something we see every week, that there was literally just 1 receiving touchdown by a running back. Look, the running back position, I explained this last week, and it's something that I think, we're going to kind of see moving forward, is that now that we're late in the season, and a lot of these teams that have been, conserving touches and limiting usage and, keeping their backs fresh so that they're as strong late in the season as they were when the year started, well, now they're going to start being unleashed. So, like, what I'd be targeting in fantasy football is big-time running backs on teams hunting for a playoff spot. I think that's a winning strategy for running backs this time of the year because they're going to take the restraints off. They got to go all in. And if they don't make the playoffs, what are they conserving them for anymore? Unleash them at this point. Look for those wild card in the mix type of teams with good backs that I think can really have a strong stretch right here with the fantasy playoffs right around the corner.
And we talked about the pass catching backs. The guys that catch passes, Joe Mixon, perfect example, fantasy RB number 6, because he catches passes. He doesn't have 100-yard games, folks. I mean, he just, does a little bit on this side, does a little bit on that one. He actually has 0. Joe Mixon has 0 100-yard rushing games this year. Last night, 68, his third best total on the year. But he usually has over 30 receiving yards, catches a couple balls. He's got, a touchdown every week since week 8, with the exception of last week. That, of course, was one of his worst weeks, one of the worst weeks for a running back all year. But Joe Mixon, again, not a 100-yard rusher, but picks up those 30, 40 yards every week as a receiver, and thus is fantasy RB6.
Another thing that Joe Mixon really has going for him, And so there's a guy like Rashad White, who we've seen make a lot of top tens recently too, is that neither of them, and there's a couple other you can mention, that don't have that running back two behind them that's really challenging for touches. They are those true workhorse style that they get, a ton of snap share, a ton of target share. They get almost the entire backfield workload. They just come off for a play or two here and there when they need a breather. So that's a very valuable thing for fantasy football as well, when there's not another back breathing down their neck that's going to steal their touches if they're having an off game.
It's absolutely true. You look for those guys. I mean, you look at CMC, lone back there. I mean, Mitchell will come in for a breather, but that's why CMC has been in your top 10, pretty much every single week. He's only missed 2, and he's your number 1 running back by far. Let me tell you about, before we get into the polls, Christian McCaffrey is obviously a running back 1, 295 fantasy points. Number 2, try to take a guess on who number 2 is, Adam?
For running backs?
Yeah.
Is it ETN?
Number 3, Mostart is number 2.
Okay.
There's only a 5-point differential there. Only 5-point differential between 2 and 3. There is an 80 fantasy point differential between 1 and 2. Christian McCaffrey has an 80 fantasy point lead on the number 2 running back. That's how important, that's how big CMC has been this year. Absolutely insane. Let's do my favorite part of the show. It's the Fantasy Holtz Check with Adam Holtz. Adam, I love this part of the show. You know I love this part of the show. I'm going to bring you in big. This is a part where you hit Holtz with some questions. NFL writer over at Sportskeeda. All right, you see the information on the screen. I'm going to take the number down for now. I promise I will put it back up, but I don't want to hide Adam's stuff here because you've got to go check out his articles. You've got to go see the information he's putting out. You've got to listen to this segment of the show. We hit Adam questions. You are not prepared. You have no idea what I'm about to ask you. And here they come. Of the top 10 quarterback teams, and really it's quarterbacks, all right? Let me run down the quarterbacks. I'm going to do it by team. I'm not going to throw the individuals. We got Buffalo, we got Philly, we got Dallas, no surprise. Washington at number 4, a little bit surprised there. Houston, Chargers, San Francisco, Kansas City, Green Bay, and Baltimore. Now, when you say those teams, you automatically know who the quarterback is for every one of those teams. All right. What you have here is consistency at quarterback. And what I mean by that is they've had the same guy all year long start every single game. Okay. But we see, obviously Rodgers went down, but we see Burrow go down. We see potentially, we don't know for how long, Lawrence has gone down. We see Cousins go down. All right. Of these top quarterback teams, can any of them truly survive if they lost their quarterback, in your opinion?
Probably not. The one that quickly jumps out is maybe they could is probably the 49ers, just because of the way that their offense is designed. And I hate even saying that because it feels like I'm discrediting what Purdy's doing this year. Purdy's having an unbelievable season. And, I talked about Dak and Hurts, Sunday Night Football kind of, being very important for the MVP race. Well, Purdy just carving up the Eagles was very important for his MVP race as well, because right now, those 3 guys are kind of way in front of the pack when you look at the odds to win the MVP now. But again, with the way Christian McCaffrey runs the ball, with the way Kyle Shanahan designs his offense, I think that if any of those top quarterback teams could survive without their starting quarterback, it's probably the 49ers. And the only other one I'd maybe bring up would have to be the Washington Commanders, because I'm still not so sure how good Sam Howell is or not. I mean, he's obviously putting up monster fantasy football numbers, but it's also obviously not translating to a whole bunch of wins. And, he's also throwing a bunch of interceptions, and some of his efficiency stuff doesn't look great either. So I'm still curious too that if you took out Sam Howell and put in a different quarterback in that new Bieniemy offense in Washington, what that would look like.
Yeah, and you don't want to take anything away from Brock. I don't know if you can talk MVP with Brock. Brock is number 4 in touchdowns, but that's the only category he's in the top 5 in. He's number 7 at number 7 in fantasy points. Excuse me, guys. And I believe he is number 5 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 in interceptions. So that's good. 5 on the low best interceptions. He's only got 6 on the year. So being a top 5 in touchdowns and a top 5 for lowest interceptions, that's fantastic for Brock. But he doesn't hit that top 5 very well. But he is having such a fantastic season. It's interesting that you say he might be the one that is quote unquote replaceable. And we're not saying that he's replaceable by any stretch of the imagination. But if someone were to fall, the system is an interesting thing to look at, which is why your next question is about the system. On the backup quarterbacks that have come in to replace these guys, I'm going to call Dobbs a backup, even though he was starting somewhere else. Dobbs, Browning now. Last night, we'll see if he can back it up. We've had Minshew come in among some others. Are these guys having success because they're good? We talk about Browning. Brock honestly was, last year is your backup guy. Now he's your starter. But we're seeing backup quarterbacks come in and have success. Dobbs looking fantastic in Minnesota right now. Are these guys that good? Is it the system? Is it a mix? What's with the success or lack of, if you talk about the Jets, lack of success with the backup quarterback? What's going on with backups, Adam?
Well, I mean, some of these guys are pretty good, and they're at least, like middle of the road type of quarterbacks. Like I think Josh Dobbs has done enough to earn that, and Gardner Minshew for me has for sure earned enough to do that because he's not just doing it this year. Gardner Minshew has a resume. He has a career of success coming in these types of spots. So sure, like the system matters, and the team around matters, of course, but it to me highlights the importance these days with all the injuries and them going up every year of having a legitimate backup quarterback. Now, the opposite end of the spectrum of these Minshews and Dobbs and whatnot, I mean, look what happened to the New York Jets this year. Look what happened to the Jets.
Legitimate, though? Can we say legitimate backup quarterback when we're talking about like a Browning? I mean, sometimes you just
Browning.
kind of
we don't know what
Browning
is right? Yet because look, like Browning had a great game against the Jags. Sure, the week before he looked terrible. So we don't exactly know what Browning is at this point. Okay, Minshew and Dobbs are the two that I'll give credit to. And let's remember too, this is why the Colts got Gardner Minshew, because they drafted a rookie quarterback who runs the ball a lot. We weren't sure what this rookie would look like, and we weren't sure if he could stay healthy with how much he runs the ball. That's why they said, let's invest in a very good backup quarterback because we don't want our season to derail if Richardson doesn't hold up this year. And look, right now, the Colts are in the playoffs. If the season ended today, the Colts are one of the wild card teams. And again, on the other end of the spectrum, look what happened to the Jets. People were calling the Jets Super Bowl contenders this year. They have a 40-year-old quarterback who, by the way, came into the season with a calf injury, so that leg was already compromised, and they still decided not to sign a real backup quarterback, and their season went down the drain 4 plays into it because Rodgers went down.
That's what I was going to bring up is it's about having at least a veteran guy. You look at New Orleans, they've got Winston, and they come out with the win, and they've done it a couple times. It doesn't hurt having Taysom Hill there either. Minnesota goes and pick up Dobbs, a veteran journeyman with experience. I mean, the Seahawks did it by getting in Geno. Minshew comes in. It's not just a backup quarterback. You got to have a backup quarterback in most cases. That has experience and that knows this league and can play. And I think that's where you see the success there. So excellent point on that, Adam, as always. Last question for the Pulse with Hulse. Give me your 2 guys. I'm going to let you do 2. I was going to make you do 1. Give me your 2 guys for Coach of the Year right now.
Oh, that's a good question. The first name that came to mind when you said it was DeMeco Ryans. With this Texans team, that was obviously awful last year. They had no expectations this year. There was a lot of talk during the off season, myself included, that said I like the direction that the team is going, but
It's a
there's
rebuilding
no
year.
chance that this is going to be the year yet. Like I
Yeah.
like the moves that they made this off season for how they'll look 2 or 3 years from now. Never in a million
Yes.
years that I think that the Texans would look as good as they look right now. They're also have one of those playoff spots in that loaded AFC conference right now. And with the Jaguars losing last night, they also still have a shot to win that division as well. So for a team that was projected by just about everybody, myself included, being a bottom 5 team this year, they're right in the mix to get into the playoffs, maybe win their division. So for me, D'Amico Ryans would be the first name that comes to mind for that.
Absolutely. I
Now,
mean,
like if I had to
we
say
had
a
them for 3
second,
wins. I had them for 3 wins, Houston, and they're 1 game out of first with Indianapolis right now. Crazy.
yeah, yeah,
Number 2.
and if I had to say a second, and there's a couple names that come to mind, but right now, I mean, a guy that isn't really getting talked about at all for the award, but he probably should be, so I'll give him some credit. What about Shane Steichen? And it's a
Okay.
situation that we just talked about on the backup quarterback segment with the Colts. Okay,
Yeah.
the Colts were expected by most before this year to be a middle of the road kind of team, right? Like, like maybe like a 6 to 8 or 9 type of win, like 9 was probably a little bit too optimistic. Like they were supposed to be okay. And a lot of that was going to be dependent upon, can Anthony Richardson come in and be a superstar right away and run around and have like a Lamar Jackson type of, rookie season. And if he could, then it's like, okay, maybe the Colts could be competitive. If he couldn't, they'd kind of be a disaster. So then when Anthony Richardson goes down and Minshew comes in, it's kind of assumed like, all right, well, that was fun while it lasted with Richardson and can't wait to see that again next year. The Colts were completely discounted, but they're also in the playoffs right now in a situation that I don't think anybody, especially with how loaded the AFC conference is, would have picked the Colts to make the playoffs.
100% sitting at the same record again. Both teams 1 game out of first. And Indianapolis, both these teams, the rookie quarterbacks, Indianapolis, let's up the challenge level a little more. We're going to take your fantastic rookie quarterback and we're going to take him out. Now you got to use your backup and do the same thing. Absolutely, both teams. I like both picks for Coach of the Year. I wouldn't have been mad. I like your 2 better than this one, but maybe in the conversation in the top 5 or something like that, I wouldn't have been mad if you said McCarthy. McCarthy, one of the few coaches that had a bunch of talent and is actually doing something with it, doing what was expected. He's got the play calls down. He's running the system the way Dak needs it to run. And they actually sit at number 1 in the point differential at 168, 100 plus 168 in point differential. That's absolutely ridiculous. I saw some stat they were running all their home game stats. Like they haven't scored less than like 40 points at home all season. I mean, these guys are in a zone, and McCarthy has a lot to do with that.
Yeah, I mean, McCarthy, head coach of my team. I have a ton of respect for what McCarthy has done this year. I'll say this, like, if the Cowboys run the table and end up being like the 1 seed in the NFC, then McCarthy might win the coach of the year. If they sit where they are now and end up being the top wild card team, the 5 seed, that's kind of where they were expected to be anyway. So I don't think McCarthy can get a coach of the year for that. The best thing that McCarthy did, though, was, and I'm surprised because he's kind of an old school, older minded type of coach. He came into the year saying he's going to fully commit to running the ball, right? Remember that whole quote before the year of, Kellen Moore wanted to try to light up the scoreboard, but I'm going to run the damn ball. And it was not working in the early stages of this year. So he used that bye week and he completely changed the design of the offense, of what they were going to do this year, how he was going to call plays, and how he was going to structure it. It's only resulted in the Cowboys being arguably the most dominant team since their bye week, as well as Dak Prescott having a strong case for being the MVP this year. So props to McCarthy for adjusting. You don't often see that with those old school type of coaches.
I still think Indy and Houston are probably the front runners for Coach of the Year, regardless how this comes out. So I think you're absolutely right on that one. But God, yeah, I think McCarthy has to be in the conversation. I just threw up my mouth a little. This was the NFL Pulse Check with Adam Holt. God, I love that part of the show. Just my absolute favorite. Let's go ahead. Let's let Adam rest his beautiful, melodious, angel-like voice for just a second. Let's get you guys into the wide receiver room. All aboard the Statline Express. All right, wide receivers. We talk DK Metcalf is your number one guy. Geno Smith, your number one quarterback. Kind of makes sense, right? Deebo Samuel coming in at number 2 as San Francisco puts on a clinic against Philadelphia. Can't wait for Dallas Philly on Sunday. Nico Collins, your wide receiver, 1 in yards, 191. Finishes as wide receiver 3 this week. 4th time on the list. And probably not his last after the Tank Dell injury. CeeDee Lamb at 4. As usual, spot here he is back on the list. Tyreek Hill, just dominating wide receivers. Wide receivers. His 9th visit in 12 games to the list. All those visits, every single one is a top 5 finish. Still rolling it out there. Jamar Chase last night with Jake Browning. Jake Browning, absolutely, Dave. We talked so much about it. This is a wide receiver spot, so we won't get into it. But, man, gets Jamar Chase to 149, gets him in number 6. Mike Evans at number 7. Again, 5 times on the list. Not bad. Christian Watson, oh, man, I said don't play him. Well, there you go. He's number 8. Pittman Jr. having a fantastic season. Guys, check the number next to his name. 9. 9 times. We talked about Indianapolis being a front runner for the Coach of the Year. We talk about them being 1 game out of first with Houston. 9 times on the top 10 list for Pittman Jr. And Devonta sneaking in there at number 4, sliding in the backfield as they keyed down on Brown. Let's talk about some facts for the week. 12 wide receivers went over 100 yards. That's about right for wide receivers. 12 over 100. 8 of those landed in your top 10. So 4 that went over 100 didn't make it, but 8 of those went over top 10. I guess I saved the screen with the little thing there. So you get that. We had 14, I believe it was, get double-digit targets, but only 3 had double-digit receptions. That's what underneath your little trash box there. 14 had double-digit targets. Only 3 had the double-digit receptions. 22 wide receivers had touchdowns. 4 had 2 or more. That's all they had, though, was 2. 3 made the top 10 without their QB. You think high-scoring fantasy QB, high-scoring receiver, your QB is going to be there. Well, 3 of them made it without their QB. That was Collins, Evans, and Pittman. Interestingly enough, Minshew finishes at QB 12. Okay, so still respectable. He's almost there. Nico Collins, CJ Stroud only finished at QB 15 this week. Nico Collins with 191 yards. So Mike Evans, over there with Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield finished at QB 19, but Mike Evans makes the list this week. Interesting there. Not bringing your QB along and still finishing that high. 54 different wide receivers have now made the top 10 this season. Christian Watson, welcome to the list. And Hill, we talked about it, still leads all wide receivers. And that is your wide receiver stop on the Statline Express. Adam Holz, how you feeling about it?
Mike Evans. Mike Evans is just always there. And I think Mike Evans has proven at this point, you mentioned Baker being QB 19 this week. Mike Evans is QB proof. He's played with a lot of them during his time now in Tampa Bay, and they haven't all been Tom Brady, okay? They haven't all been Tom Brady. It's been a lot of not-so-great ones along the way, too, but yet this dude turns in 1,000 yards every season. His streak just goes on. He's a future Hall of Famer. In my opinion, he still doesn't get nearly enough credit that he deserves.
Kid's sick. Love me some Mike Evans. I try to grab him every single year, and I got him this year. Anybody, you guys get it?
Evans? Yeah, just wait till this offseason when all those experts will tell you again that the regression's coming this year. Oh, it's coming because it's been coming for the last 5 years, right?
I love talking about Mike Evans. It's just fun to talk
about. Mike Evans and Keenan Allen. Those are the 2, man.
Yep. Absolutely right. Those are the guys, ageless. Let's get into this week. We're going to talk about fantasy picks, talk about some DFS stuff, and we're going to hit you heavy. We're going to hit you hard with this week's games coming up. First up, Thursday, New England at Pittsburgh. I'm done. There you go. There's who you play. Nobody.
Play your
Zero.
defenses. That's it.
Think so? Like his offenses are that bad, play the defenses? I can get it.
Play your defenses.
Yeah.
I'll play my defenses. That's it.
Get your DFS value right here. DFS value right here, folks, especially at New England defense. You talk about Pickett's probably going to miss the game. So New England defense, I can definitely get behind that. Sure. Do your week-long DFS. Hit that one. Tampa Bay at Atlanta. This one actually should be a decent game. A little bit riding on the line as far as the standings go in this one. You can steal some points in this one. The thing is, we've got all the teams this week. We don't have the buys, so it's going to be hard to play. Well, we got Arizona and Washington. Arizona and Washington are on the bye. We got two teams on the bye, so we got 15 games this week. But Tampa, Atlanta, I don't know. You got Mike Evans. We're gonna play Mike Evans. Yeah, I don't know. That might be it for me.
Look, I mean, the only thing that can keep Sam Howell out of the top 10 this week is the fact that he's on a bye. That's the only reason he won't be in the top 10 against Sam Howell. Now, one guy I'm looking at in this Atlanta-Tampa Bay game is Drake London. He's been up and down all year. He's coming off of a bad game last week. Tampa Bay has traditionally struggled to slow down wide receivers, so this could be a bounce-back spot for Drake London.
It could be, and it is, and that's the thing that you have to deal with Drake London is the inconsistency. But when he's there, and he gets you those PPR points. If it's not PPR, you're probably not going to play him. If it's PPR, yeah, you might throw Drake London in. Detroit at Chicago, yep, you're going to play him. All your Detroit guys coming in, Monty, Gibbs, Amon-Ra, Goff, they're coming in. Throw Fields in there for sure. I would throw in DJ Moore. Who am I missing?
No, I mean, you got them all. And look, obviously for DFS type stuff, the Lions are going to be a popular team to target this week against the Chicago Bears. But because of this game script type stuff we've been talking about in this episode, especially when you did the quarterback segment, right?
Yeah.
Justin Fields, he has a favorable game script this week. He has rushing upside this week. It's a game that could potentially be high scoring against the Lions defense that we mentioned during this episode too. They have severely struggled in recent weeks. They're back to giving up a whole bunch of points. I love Fields as a sneaky DFS play this week.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And some people are starting playoffs this week. So if you got Fields, you're feeling okay this week. It was good first week here. As playoffs hit your wild card spots, if you will. Indianapolis at Cincinnati. Normally, you would have thought, I don't know, after last night. Now, I guess Cincinnati is definitely 100% still playing ball. Everybody said Burrow goes down, Cincinnati's done. That's all right. Browning may have something to say about that. We'll find out this week as Indianapolis goes to Cincinnati. Browning with the home crowd behind him this week. I'm playing Minshew. I'm obviously playing in Superflex. I'm playing Minshew. I'm playing Pittman Jr. I'm probably playing Zach Moss. Cincinnati, I guess I'm going to play Mixon. I won't say to sit him again. I'll tell you that. Jamar Chase and Browning, you're going to see what they can do, right?
Yeah, I mean, we learned our lesson last week, calling Mixon the fade last week. Won't do it again this week. For this matchup, I actually really like this matchup for fantasy points. I think this could be a higher scoring fantasy kind of game. There's a lot of options that I like in this one. And, Pittman, obviously, Chase, obviously, but, like the backs and, if you're looking to build a DFS lineup, using some Colts and Bengals might not be attractive to many, and these could be some guys that are overlooked. Those are the guys I'm looking to get in my lineup.
When people look at this game, they're going to look at Jake Browning. They're going to try and get big value out of Jake Browning against Indianapolis. I would look the other way. I would get some value out of the Minshew-Pittman hookup because we talked about how many times Pittman, 9 times on the top 10 list. All right, Gardner Minshew right there in the conversation. He's having a great season. I think you get a lot of DFS value out of a Minshew-Pittman lineup and then go grab some heavy hitters like a CMC. You can actually get CMC on your roster this week by doing a Minshew-Pittman stack.
The Minshew-Pittman stack, I like that call this week a lot.
Thank you, my friend. Jacksonville at Cleveland. We'll wait to see how Lawrence is. Lawrence probably not going to play in this one. Let's be honest. We saw the injury last night. If he does, he's not going to be the Lawrence that you need. Cleveland's defense, like we said, probably getting a little tired. But I don't think there's a lot of fantasy points in this game. And Christian Kirk, man, devastating loss with Christian Kirk getting injured last night.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I'm not a big fan of really anything fantasy wise in this game. The only thing I'll mention from the fantasy perspective is that if Amari Cooper is going to miss this game, it's what's making Elijah Moore one of those popular waiver wire ads this week. Elijah Moore he's having a strange season. His targets are excellent. You know, he's getting the volume. He's just not doing anything with that volume. If Cooper's out, maybe that changes. Him and Flacco seem to be kind of on the same page in Flacco's first start last week. So I'm keeping my eye on Elijah Moore, though I'm not like running to get him into my lineups.
Yeah, look, Elijah Moore has finished in the top 15, and we talk about how fantasy works. All right, above 15 is 15 fantasy points a week. That's the sweet spot, right? That's where you want to be. Considering, you know, your 10-team league, you got 20 receivers. You can actually extend that number a little bit. But if you get in the top 15, your wide receiver had a good week. You can't be mad at your wide receiver for finishing in the top 10, or excuse me, top 15 every on a weekly basis or for that week. Elijah Moore has finished in the top 15 every single week. Every single solitary week this season, Elijah Moore has been in your top 15. If you're carrying Elijah Moore, you're not mad at that. That's a nice value that you picked up in your draft this year. Elijah Moore sits at fantasy wide receiver 51, but he can fill that spot. He can definitely do something for you every single week in the top 15. Astonishing, really, considering the ups and downs that Cleveland just had at the QB position. Carolina at New Orleans. This is one of those games where you can get fantasy points. Obviously, Kamara is going to play. Kamara having a fantastic season, 7 times in the top 10 list, and he does not have a full slate behind him. It's the quarterback position you got to worry about, but you don't really have to worry about the quarterback position because you have Winston and Taysom Hill to cover both of those. I like Taysom Hill in this one. And Carolina, I don't know. Do you want to play Chuba this week, Adam?
I don't really want to play Chuba this week, but I didn't want to play him last week either, and he went off, you know. So this one, I don't think I did learn my lesson from. I'll call Chuba a fade for the second week in a row, and maybe that'll bite me again. The only thing I'm going to mention about Alvin Kamara is obviously in, you know, regular fantasy leagues, Kamara's a lineup lock every week, regardless of who he's playing. Carolina has been awful against the run this year. They've been good against the pass this year. So when you build out DFS lineups, right, like you need a couple of guys that you're going to spend big on. This might really be the week to spend big on Kamara against a very, very struggling Carolina rushing defense, a passing defense that's pretty good. Jameis Winston might be starting this week, which could mean even more work for Kamara than usual if they want to limit their passing attempts. They have some injuries with their wide receivers as well. To me, there's a lot of things pointing to Kamara maybe being the guy that I build DFS lineups around, especially if, kind of like you said before with your Minshew-Pittman stack, Minshew's a cheaper quarterback. So if you're saving money on quarterback, you know, you can get a guy like Kamara in there.
Yeah, I had to backtrack a little bit on Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore, 15 fantasy points. I said finishing in the top 15 fantasy points every week. I apologize for that. A little misleading on that. But 15 fantasy points, I want more than that. But if, you know, I got to get something, at least I get 15 out of them. 15 every week. Let's see. Kamara, you know, finishing in the top 20 every single week that he's played. He's been in since week 4. He has finished in the top 20. We talk about 15 still being the sweet spot for running backs. Roughly 13-ish running backs on average every week finish at 15 or more points. Okay, you get above 20 points, you get down to the single digits, 9, 8, 9 range. But 13 running backs every week finish with 15 or more points. It's a little bit lower scoring position, but if you want the top guys, 15 or more is where you want them to finish. Alvin Kamara has finished in the top 15 every single week except week 9, finished in the top 20 every single week since starting in week 4. So Kimura, nice, safe, solid play. Don't feel bad about grabbing him. I like him in the DFS spot. That's good. That's really smart. Houston at New York, Adam. Houston is obviously the team we're looking at. New York is not. Nico Collins, Brown, Stroud, a lot of success. Now they face New York. I like Brown more in this one as New York has done a good job on the outside. So I like Brown underneath and maybe a little tight end with Schultz on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you there. With Sauce and Reed on the outside, they've done a great job at shutting down wide receiver ones and outside receivers in general. So though I love Nico Collins' outlook for the rest of the year with Tank Dell going down, this particular matchup is not a great one for Nico. And look, the Jets defense has been great this year. The Texans to me are more of a team to fade this week, fantasy wise. And obviously, you're never excited to get any Jets players in your lineup at this point.
You might find some DFS plays in the Rams at Baltimore. You're going to play Lamar, obviously. Gus Edwards quietly coming along. He's finishing the top 10 I think 3 times pretty consistently over the last 5 games. And the Rams, of course, are the Rams. You just got to figure out which ones to play. I'm not afraid here. I'm not afraid to play my Rams against Baltimore.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. It's just like figuring out week to week now with these Rams receivers, like which ones to go for. I mean, Cooper Kupp has been very quiet lately. He's like, when he came back from his injury and he exploded right away, we're like, well, same old Cooper Kupp. Here comes another monster Cooper Kupp season. And I think it was only like 2 games that he did that for, and he really hasn't been the same since then. Look, I mean, the guy on the Rams, it looks like going forward. And by the way, the Rams are right in the mix for a playoff spot, too. They're on the outside looking in, but they have the same record as both the 6 and the 7 seed in the NFC right now. So we might see the Rams in the playoffs as well. It's Kyren Williams. Like I raved about him before. He is their guy now. They're going to lean on him. And look, when it comes to Sean McVay, we always talk about, the prolific, passing design of his offenses. When it really comes down to it, though, McVay prefers to run the ball. He is a run-first play caller. It's just that his passing numbers are so great. It's very Shanahan-esque, right? Mm-hmm. Like Purdy and the quarterbacks can light things up in that Shanahan offense because of the way it's designed. But Shanahan will run the ball until you stop it. And McVay does a lot of that same style of offense. I mean, even look back to like the Todd Gurley days. Do you remember when Todd Gurley was like RB1 in that McVay system? Now, I'm not saying Kyren Williams is going to be Todd Gurley, but in the very small sample size that we've seen of Kyren Williams, he does have that upside.
Todd Gurley is the only running back or the only player in the past decade to be considered the consensus number 1 and finish as a consensus number 1. Now, he only did it in standard scoring. He didn't do it. Nobody's done it in PPR. But he's the asterisk there to that stat that normally it's no consensus number 1 pick finishes as number 1. They seldom finish in the top 5, to be honest. Gurley can say he did it at least in standard scoring. So, yeah, absolutely. And no shying away from the Shanahan mentality in Miami either. Little side note on that. So definitely, I mean, there are 4 teams with 6 wins in the NFC. 5 teams with 6 wins in the NFC. So 6 wins still very, very much in the picture, as you say. Minnesota at Las Vegas, fantasy-wise, DFS-wise, I'm liking this one. Maybe Jefferson comes back in this one. Minnesota, Las Vegas, all your players, I like them.
I agree. This is definitely a good game to target for fantasy. And look, if Jefferson does come back, right, I'm interested to see what Dobbs does with Justin Jefferson because we haven't seen that yet. Dobbs has been unbelievable since he got to the Vikings, especially, fantasy-wise, turning in top 10s. I think he had like 3 of them or something like that with the Vikings without Jefferson. Add Jefferson in his lineup, and I'm very curious to see what that looks like.
And I don't think you'll get the full flavor of it this week with their first week hooking up. But, yeah, that could be a tandem that could do something down the stretch, maybe still in play for a wild card at this point. Seattle at San Francisco. San Francisco won this the first time, and it was in Seattle. Seattle is kind of on a little, I'm not going to call them on a streak, but they're feeling up. They got QB1, they got wide receiver 1. Metcalf hit over 22 miles per hour again this week, like last week. I mean, Seattle, San Francisco, this was supposed to be one of the games of the week. Obviously, it's not going to compare to the Sunday night game, but this is supposed to be a game where players are showing up. We're obviously playing our San Francisco guys. We're hoping Ayuk comes back to life. I like Ayuk to switch back with Debo. I like Ayuk to be the number 1 guy and Debo to kind of slide back down. This week, Seattle is your mystery. Do I play Charbonnet? I'm probably not going to play Charbonnet, but do I play my Seattle receivers? And if so, which one? I like JSN this week for a touchdown, by the way.
Yeah, for me, when it comes to Seattle, I'm really only playing DK Metcalf this week. He's really been, to me, the only receiver that's been like reliable fantasy-wise for the Seahawks. Lockett and JSN, kind of, sure, like they have upside, but they also have pretty low weekly floors because they kind of like share those targets in like a wide receiver 2/3 in that offense. It's Metcalf who's had the reliable volume. He obviously went off against the Cowboys in that loss. Geno Smith, not interested in Geno. He had a great game against the Cowboys, but he's had a bad season, so I'm not going to be fooled by that one good performance just yet. Look, I mean, the Niners, you're obviously starting everybody. Their entire offense, you just have to start every week at this point. But for Seahawks, for me, it's Metcalf, and I'd kind of fade the rest.
Yeah, Facebook user, I'm sorry that doesn't come through. You got to click the little thing, and sometimes it does, sometimes it does. Facebook user said Lockett sadly fading out. I have an idea. This is one of a couple people. America's team, that if for them, that's Miami, not Dallas, I believe. But are the Dolphins the number 1 seed in the AFC?
They are. The Dolphins are the number 1 seed in the AFC right now.
Should they be, though? I think is the question.
I think that...
Will it stay that way, I guess? That's probably more...
Will it stay that way? Like, right now, the way it's looking is that it's either going to be the Ravens or the Dolphins, is what it kind of looks like right now. Interesting side note, though, if the Jags had beaten the Bengals on Monday Night Football, the Jags actually would have been the 1 seed. The week would have ended with the Jags in the 1 seed, with the Jags having that first round bye and home field advantage. Interesting note there. But because they lost, Miami hangs on to the 1 seed for now.
It'll be interesting. Now the Jags just hoping that what they've done so far, they can maintain it, steal a couple until Lawrence gets back, and still make.
I think the Jags will still get in the playoffs, but if Lawrence is really out, obviously they're not going anywhere in the playoffs. So they'd be as good as out if Lawrence is out. But I think either way they'll get there, and the hope is that even if he can't come back for the regular season, that they could still sneak their way in, and hopefully he's healthy enough for the wild card rounds.
Speaking of AFC wild card, we got Buffalo at Kansas City. Who stacked this week? Can we spread them out? Oh my God, we got Seattle and San Francisco. I got Buffalo at Kansas City. We got the Sunday night game we're going to talk about in a second. Buffalo at Kansas City. We talked about the success of Josh Allen. He gets slept on a lot because they want to talk about his interceptions. Let's talk about Josh Allen, number 1 in fantasy points, number 2 now because he had the week off. Number 2 in touchdowns. Yes, he's number 2 in interceptions, but when you're number 1 in fantasy points and touchdowns at number 2, that's okay. You need to get the wins, though, and Buffalo has to go to Kansas City to do it. We've seen a slight weakness in Kansas City. Is Kansas City's going to bounce back and say, no, that wasn't us, or can Buffalo make this a game? This is a fantastic game.
Look, I mean, this is pretty much a must-win situation for Buffalo right now, right? I mean, they are really on the edge.
Does it help you in fantasy? We got to incorporate that into this answer. Does it help? Are we still looking at our fantasy players here? And if so, which ones? Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
In this specific game, in Bills Chiefs. I
Yes.
mean, for me, the Chiefs have become, Mahomes, Kelsey, Pacheco are easily obvious starters every week in fantasy.
Do we
And
like
then
Rice for a
for
value?
the receiver,
Do we like Rice for a value?
well, that's what I was going to say. That
Okay.
Mahomes, Pacheco, Kelsey are your auto starts every week in fantasy football, right?
Yeah.
Rice is that borderline guy, right? Like, I like Rice, and he definitely gets the volume, and he's definitely a solid lineup option most weeks. But he's the one that you can debate each week of whether or not to plug him into your lineup. The rest of those receivers shouldn't even be on a roster at this point. They should be all on the free agent side. So that's kind of how the Chiefs work right now. The big three start every week. Rice is going to be that borderline option. In this matchup with the Bills, I'm definitely playing Rice. I have Rice in my lineups this week against the Bills in a game that when these two teams play, they usually turn into high scoring games, right? That usually turns into the Mahomes versus Josh Allen show, which is what I'm kind of expecting it to be again. That Mahomes kind of back against the wall a little bit right now. There's a lot of negative media attention going around with Mahomes and this Chiefs offense. Kind of down talking their receivers and how their offense isn't explosive and how they're struggling and how they're reeling. I think Mahomes is going to thrive in a spot like that. Now that there's some of that negative attention and he gets to face a team in the Bills that he's already had some success against in an important game and a team that he's seen in the playoffs multiple times, this might be a big game for Mahomes. And we already know that Josh Allen shows up in big games, right? He's done it his whole career so far. Big spots, big moments. He usually has his best performances, minus the Bengals game in the playoffs last year where he didn't show up, but he usually does against the Chiefs and the Bills in a must-win situation. Fantasy-wise for the Bills, I'm probably fading James Cook if I can. Cook isn't a guy that I'd love to put in my lineups this week. I mean, he's not a bad option. He's not like a guy who has to be benched, but if you have other options, there's a lot of guys I like more than Cook this week. To me, like, the interesting ones are Gabe Davis and Khalil Shakir.
Yes. 100%.
We
talked about the success that Kansas City's defense has had against wide receiver ones. Watson was able to do something with that this week, but again, holding Tyreek Hill to 12, Devontae Adams to 12, A.J. Brown to 1.8, Keenan Allen to 9.5. Kansas City defense can shut down a wide receiver one, so Diggs kind of scares me this week. I mean, obviously going to play him, but don't expect to see him get shut down, and that means I like Davis and I like Shakir in this one. I guarantee two things. Allen is going to get an interception in this game because he's done it in every other game, and he's probably going to run one in the end zone as well. So this is going to be a good game for fantasy points. I agree. Denver at Los Angeles Chargers. Denver's win streak gets snapped this week, but hey, thank goodness they get to play the Chargers, who typically put up points, although they didn't against New England. But the Chargers put up points, but they don't get the win. So I actually like Denver, for the win this week. I like the Chargers better for fantasy points. I like Herbert. I like Allen. I don't know. I'll put a little Eckler in there. I think Allen can handle Surtain. He handles literally everybody in the league. He has all year long. So I'm not afraid of those guys in this one. Denver, at the same story as usual. I like Sutton. And that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, Keenan Allen's never a guy that you can bench, obviously, but he's also not a guy I'm going to target in like DFS this week because it's not a great matchup for him. So I don't think he's worth the extremely high price tag in that kind of a matchup. His price is too
high. I like his points, but his price is too high. I agree.
Yeah, like he doesn't, have the same upside for players priced similarly to put into a DFS lineup. Like a guy we mentioned before, Kamara, and I outlined all the things I like about Kamara this week. If I'm deciding in DFS between Keenan and Kamara, I'm definitely going Kamara this week. For season long, obviously, they're both in your lineups. Like you're never going to bench either one of those kinds of players. The guy I'm, thinking about for the Broncos this week is Javonte Williams. He has had some up games. He's had some down games. This Chargers defense is beatable, both in the pass and the run, by the way. They're not really all that good against either one of them. The Broncos, with coming off of a loss, I think maybe they will get back to what was really the bread and butter of their winning streak, which was running the ball, handing the ball off to Javonte Williams. He had a ton of carries during their winning streak. After the loss, maybe they get back to it. I kind of like Javonte as a sneaky play.
Interesting. I wouldn't have gone there, but I respect it, and it definitely makes a lot of sense. The game of Sunday, the game of the week, I'm going to call it the game of the week. Philly at Dallas, fantasy-wise, this is our play everybody game of the week. It's got to be, right?
For sure. There's nobody I'm fading in this game. If you have Eagles or Cowboys, put them all in.
All of them. Hurts is going to ball. Prescott's going to ball. We got to, we're going to see someone pull ahead in the MVP conversation in this one. This is going to be a great fantasy matchup. It's going to have a ton of implications for the standings. It's going to have a ton of implications on a couple different races in the game. And honestly, this would tie Dallas and Philly, would it not?
It would tie them in the standings. Philly would still own the tiebreakers for now. So though they'd have the same record, Philly would still be in the driver's seat for the division. But you know what's going to happen in this game, right? Because it's so obvious that this is the fantasy game that's going to have 1,000,000 points by everybody. It's going to be a shootout. It's going to be, the MVP battle between Hurts and Dak Prescott. The game's going to end 13-10. That's what's going to happen.
Don't say it. Come on, you're not supposed to say that stuff out loud, Adam. Maybe by saying it out loud, it won't happen. Again, Dallas has not scored less than 40 points at home all season. That's a big ask.
And they've won 14 in a row at home. They have a 14-game winning streak in Dallas, the Cowboys do. This game in Dallas, too. So either they're going to get to 15 in a row or the Eagles are going to end that impressive streak.
The kibosh, as we would hear on the broadcast. Has the kibosh been thrown with all these favorable stats for Dallas? We'll find out on Sunday. Monday night matchups. Tennessee at Miami. Play all your Miami guys. Sit all your Tennessee guys. Am I wrong? I'm not.
Yeah, the only guy we're watching is Tyjae Spears on the Titans, right? Like, if Henry's out, is Spears going to play?
Tyjae Spears. I like Spears for a value play. I think he can do something.
Because of his receiving upside, right? He's a very good receiver out of the backfields. And, we're expecting Miami to score 1,000,000 points, right? And go up early, and then the Titans are going to be left to having to pass the ball all game. A lot of check down points later in the game and in garbage time for Spears. So if Henry's out, I think you can play Spears this week.
I do, and that's where you get scared, is because Tennessee's going to have to pass the ball. But you're right, Spears catches the ball, and honestly, they're going to have trouble getting it downfield anyway. Most teams have against Miami since the return of the Islander. Green Bay and New York. Miami also, watch the running back room to see how Mostert's status is going to be. Green Bay at New York, the other Monday night game that no one's going to watch because, honestly, Green Bay should just destroy in this one. Play your Green Bay guys. I won't say sit Watson again. I'll tell you that. I like Watson. I like Love. I hope you don't have to use the running back room here, although I think they will get a little bit of play because they're going to be up. They're going to be working some clock, things like that, trying to open up that passing game. But I like Love. I like Watson. You might sneak a Doubs in there if you had to. When you're at that last player on your DFS roster and you've got just enough money to buy a player and you're looking for who to grab, you might be able to grab Doubs in this one. But there you go.
Yeah, I do love Love as well in this game. He is a QB1 this season. Yeah, he is a QB1 this season in fantasy points. He's in the top 10, kind of quietly, kind of sneakily. The Giants' defense has been awful. I don't love the Packers receivers in this game just because it's one of those situations where, you don't know which one it's going to be week to week, right? There's some Watson weeks. There's some Doubs weeks. There's some Jaden Reed weeks. Dontavion Wicks is getting in the mix now, too. Their receivers are very difficult for me to figure out. And again, not that Wicks is a fantasy option, but he does get targets and he does help that offense as well. So I'm going to fade their receivers. I definitely like Love. And as for the Giants, it's just Saquon. That's it.
That's it. Yeah, I got to play Saquon. That's it. As we wrap up the show this week, we absolutely did not shave any time off. Good job, guys. Did not shave any time off, but we give thanks, as always, to the Adam Hulse, NFL writer over at sportskita.com. That's Kita with a K. Go check him out. Let me get you that big screen. That's where you're going to find him, but you want to be able to read it. So let's maybe do this one over here. Boom. Go over there, sportskita.com. Look up Adam Hulse. Check out his articles every single week. They are fantastic. I love Adam Hulse. He's awesome. Thanks for joining the show. And we'll finish you out. I got less than a minute to finish you out on some NFL stats for the year. Fantasy-wise, 15 quarterbacks are above 200 fantasy points. 15 quarterbacks are above 200 fantasy points. So that supports your streaming a weekly quarterback theory. 3 running backs, 21 running backs are over 150 points. Okay, so you talk about your zero RB strategy. That's because there's 21 running backs over 150 points so far. There's only 3 that are above 200. You can guess who those 3 are. And at the wide receiver, 11 wide receivers are above 200 points. Only 1 is over 300 points. That, of course, is Tyreek Hill. Only 11 wide receivers versus your 21 running backs. Zero RB making a lot more sense when you break it down like that in week 13. And just a quick visit to the tight end room. 14 tight ends are above 100. Can you stream them? Yeah, but only 4 are above 150. Who's your leader? Is it Kelsey? No, he's number 2. Hawkinson's your tight end number 1. Thanks for joining us on That EFIN Sports Show. Go back, check out all the stats on the stat line. We'll make sure to get those on Instagram. We got the QB room, the wide receiver room, the running back room. We just gave you some NFL stats, and we gave you the best absolute NFL information, fantasy information in the game on That EFIN Sports Show, That EFIN Morning After Show. Find us on the Fantasy Sports Core channel. Everybody have a great fantasy week. Let us know how you did. We'll see you next week. Be safe, everybody.